So right after President Trump ordered JD Vance to conduct a nationwide fraud crackdown, the vice president came out and announced that he'll be starting with Minnesota first, which is sending Tim Walz and other Minnesota politicians into a panic. Welcome to the Immigration Report. If you want daily immigration updates without bias, with evidence, please consider subscribing. Let us get into it, starting with this announcement from JD Vance.
We're announcing today that we have decided to temporarily halt certain amounts of Medicaid funding that are going to the state of Minnesota in order to ensure that the state of Minnesota takes its obligations seriously to be good stewards of the American people's tax money. Now, what is this going to mean? What this means is that, first of all, the providers on the ground in Minnesota have actually already been paid. The state has paid those providers the money. What we're doing is we are stopping the federal payments that will go to the state government until the state government takes its obligations seriously to stop the fraud that's being perpetrated against the American taxpayer.
So that is the Vice President JD Vance making it clear to Tim Walz and Minnesota that the Trump administration will not be sending any more money to the state unless they start taking their obligations seriously to protect taxpayers' money. And here is Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, on that same matter.
We did what any honest and patient-focused agency would do. We have notified the state and that we will give them the money, but we're going to hold it and only release it after they propose and act on a comprehensive corrective action plan to solve the problem. If Minnesota fails to clean up the systems, the state will rack up $1 billion of deferred payments this year. Governor Walz has 60 days, sir, to respond to our letter. And if providers and beneficiaries are worried about getting their money and services, please call your governor. We are just not reimbursing the state. And to make it clear, there is a rainy day fund in Minnesota, so we are very confident that people will not be hurt in Minnesota.
So basically what the Trump administration and the vice president is doing here is that they're using Minnesota to make an example. They're telling them that, hey, if you don't clean up all the fraud that's running wild throughout your state, you'll not be getting federal funding for Medicaid. And it's unfortunate because people who actually deserve these benefits are going to suffer. All because Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, and Jacob Fry, they allowed the fraud to run wild throughout their state. And we have a reaction from Tim Walz in regards to this announcement. And he tweeted, "This is a campaign of retribution. Trump is weaponizing the entirety of the federal government to punish blue states like Minnesota. These cuts will be devastating for veterans, families with young kids, folks with disabilities, and working people across our state." And here's Vice President JD Vance actually announcing some of the fraud that's been uncovered in Minnesota. Take a look.
But let me talk a little bit about the spirit of this and why we're doing it. So number one of the examples of fraud that we've seen in Minnesota that we verified that is just awful is that a program that existed to ensure that autistic children had access to some after-school services has made a number of people rich. Not by providing services to needy children, but by allowing fraudsters to take money that ought by right go to American citizens and to American families, and to set up sham businesses, set up sham clients, set up people who are not even autistic but claim to be autistic in order that they benefit from the money that's out there. Now, what does that mean? Number one, it means that a lot of people are getting rich off the generosity of American taxpayers, but more fundamentally and more importantly than that, it means that there are kids in Minnesota who deserve these services, who need these services, and they're not going to those kids, they're going to fraudsters in Minneapolis. That is unacceptable, and that's the sort of thing that we're cutting off with this action today.
And that was the vice president on one of the fraud that's been uncovered in Minnesota. And Tim Walz had the audacity to say that the Trump administration is weaponizing the federal government, when Tim Walz allowed all this fraud to happen throughout the state. And he did nothing to prosecute these criminals, to prosecute these fraudsters. And now the Trump administration is cracking down on this fraud. He's going to say that the Trump administration is weaponizing the federal government to attack blue states. And just to show you how massive this fraud is, because it's not just Minnesota, and I have an article here, I'm going to get back to this article, But we have some numbers here that says the Government Accountability Office estimates between $320 billion to $520 billion in taxpayer funds is lost to fraud on an annual basis. That is a lot of money. And here's Dr. Oz and some of the other frauds that were uncovered. Take a look.
Adjudicated numbers. There's a fraud scheme in Minnesota where criminals, soon to be criminals, pay moms $1,000 roughly in order to enroll their children as being autistic, falsely, dishonestly claiming their children are autistic. They then bill Medicaid, this has already happened, millions of dollars for services that were never rendered, never delivered by a qualified staff member. These schemes disproportionately involve immigrant communities. They're insulated, they're able to organize efforts, and sometimes they don't understand what's going on. And it ultimately diverts resources away from kids who truly have autism. Because if every kid in the neighborhood has autism, then nobody has autism in terms of how you can manage them. There was one behavioral, and by the way, these kids, they carry that diagnosis of autism the rest of their lives.
So as you can see, the fraud in Minnesota is running wild, which is why the Trump administration is focusing so much on Minnesota. But Tim Walz, he's panicking. That is why he's saying the Trump administration is weaponizing the federal government. But that is not the case. The case is that there's a whole bunch of fraud throughout the state. And Dr. Oz even just mentioned it. A lot of this has to do with the immigrant community. People who come from a different country with different cultures, different lifestyle, and they import those behaviors to the United States and then start ripping off taxpayers, start defrauding the American government, the people's government. And now the Trump administration is actually taking this thing serious. This is not just an announcement and then it's going to go away in a week. Even Congress is showing support for the Trump administration. And here we have Senator Smith, who is giving some advice to the vice president. He's telling the vice president, be aggressive, prosecute relentlessly, recover the assets on behalf of the American people, and take a look at this video.
And you look at Minnesota specifically, where efforts to crack down on fraud were met not with support, but with accusations of fascism and racism. Fraud networks operate because they believe the risk is low and the reward is high. That's an incentive structure. And wars are fought by changing incentives, and that's what we're going to do with this war on fraud. My advice, for what it's worth, be aggressive, prosecute relentlessly, and recover the assets on behalf of the American people.
So as you can see, the Trump administration is taking this thing serious, this whole fraud situation. Congress is taking this thing serious. And just to show you how serious the Trump administration is taking this whole thing, they announced JD Vance to fight against fraud. Not only that, they set up a specific office in DOJ to fight against fraud as well. They announced a fraud czar. And here we have an article that says the fraud czar nominee tells Minnesota's blueprint to root out fraud throughout the United States government, right? And they're going to take that entire model throughout the rest of the country. And the article reads, the crackdown on fraud in Minnesota will serve as a blueprint for a new Department of Justice office focused on protecting taxpayer funds from scams. The article goes on to say Trump tapped McDonnell as the nominee in January, just days after establishing the new Department of Justice's new division for national fraud enforcement that will investigate, prosecute, and remedy fraud affecting the federal government. So as you can see, you're going to see a whole bunch of prosecution. You're going to see a whole bunch of arrests. You're going to see a whole bunch of investigations. So basically, the American people will actually start seeing accountability. Finally, for all the fraud that's been going on for decades, for years, we're finally going to start seeing accountability. And here we have JD Vance right after he was announced to become the overseer of this entire fraud. Take a look at this interview.
Well, I don't know what the top line number, Bill, is, and I think that's unfortunate that nobody has ever tried to take a systematic look at how much fraud there is in the federal government. How many illegal aliens are on Medicaid? We know that it's billions and billions of dollars that should go to American citizens. It's going to illegal aliens. How many fraudulent daycare centers have been set up where that money should go to American citizens to help their kids get into childcare? Instead, it's being stolen from them by illegal aliens in our country. How much have government officials actually been complicit in this fraud because some of them have gotten wealthy, or at the least, they've gotten campaign donations from the people who have gotten rich from that fraud? The story of the American economy in so many ways during the Biden administration, Bill, is that the American citizen was ripped off for people who shouldn't be here and by politicians who should have known better. And the Trump administration, the president has asked me to take a full whole government approach to trying to understand that. And what does that mean, Bill? That means, first of all, the Department of Justice is going to be investigating and, where possible, throwing fraudsters in prison. But it's also going to mean that Scott Bessent and some of our friends at the Treasury Department, we're going to be looking at income tax records. We're going to be trying to understand how it is that the American people have been defrauded, how it is that people have used resources and programs that should go to American citizens.
As you can see, the Trump administration, they're going all in. They're not messing around with this whole fraud situation. And that brings us to the end of today's immigration report. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Also, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.